In the first grade, we weren't expected to learn much, so we just rolled through the classes easily. Half of our classes were taught by our homeroom teacher, Mrs. Leland, and the other half were taught to us by the dreaded Sister Mary. I felt sorry for her homeroom class. She taught us math and a few other courses. She didn't paddle us, but she was very physical, and mostly just a lot of grabbing and pointing. Nuns would grab your head if you were looking at what you weren't supposed to be and would spin it around and forward toward the chalkboard. They'd whack you on the wrist and they'd say, "The devil has a hold of you, young man." At that point in my life, I wasn't aware of such deep implications, just that adults are often harsh. The world was still a bright and inviting place, full of adventure and new things to take in. As kids, we had a limited perspective on everything, and my world was beginning to take shape at that school. I remember hoping it would change suddenly and I'd be out of that school. But of course, what kind of school was there outside of the school I was in? I had no idea. I only went to one kind of school up to and through 8th grade, religious schools. I suppose we'd learned some things too. I got good grades in 1st grade and was told that I was a pretty bright kid. I remember being rambunctious and full of energy. Still in? 2nd grade. By 2nd grade, we students began to spend more time in the church, and to this day, there's a ton of memories in my head about every square foot of that building. As early as I can remember, I went to church with my family, and the only church I can remember us going to was my school's church, Holy Ghost Church. Going to church on Sundays with my family was always a very peculiar and uncomfortable experience for me. My sister seemed to feel the same, but didn't put that signal out. I was a rowdy and anxious kid who couldn't stand to sit still for an hour. Church seemed to disallow that attitude, so church was very annoying for me, for that reason and others. One thing that bothered me about church was the fact that everyone who entered that building had to sort of shut themselves down a bit, quite a bit, depending on the purpose for going in. During a service, people became half of themselves at best. I made a clear mental note of this as I myself got quieter and more reverent. Church was always a dark and mysterious place to me, since we had a large and modern church that was like a medieval cathedral. In fact, the whole church was actually shaped like a cross. It had 3 entrances, 2 side entrances, and a larger single entrance that served as the front of the church. When you entered the front, it felt like we were walking into the bottom of a giant cross that's been laid down flat on the ground. It didn't really look like that from the ground, which only gives an idea of how large this church is. Smack dab in the middle of southwest Houston and seemingly designed with the modern approach to medieval architecture in mind. As soon as you walk into the church, which is still very much standing and well-funded, you walk into the foyer. Here you can light a votive candle, sign a prayer card, shake hands with the ushers, or maybe even talk with the celebrant. He's the one leading the Mass. On your right is the baptismal room, with the marble and steel baptismal bowl on a waist-high steel stand permanently set into the floor. That room is encased in glass, making it easy to see inside. To your left is the quiet room, also called the crying room. This room told me a lot about Christianity. The quiet room is the other glass-encased room where parents are asked to take their noisy children during Mass. Yes, my mother took me and my sister in there on several occasions. It's just a section of pews in the back of the church that are walled off with glass. It's a noisy room on a Sunday morning. What was so revealing about Christianity in that room was the fact that it existed at all. There's no such place in a public library or a museum. They have separate rooms, but no architect sat down to specifically design a room where unruly children should be taken. If the kid doesn't want to behave or even be in the library or the museum, that kid shouldn't have to, and should be removed. Whatever's going on in there just isn't that vital. But this particular church was different. Church itself is different. Inside the quiet room, there was an intercom speaker that piped in everything that was being said into the microphones at the altar. As I grew up, I began to wonder what was wrong with me that I found myself listening to a voice, not unlike that on the radio, telling me to sing and pray and shake my neighbor's hand. I could see it all through the glass, but I felt like we kids were being treated like a problem. We were a problem in the society of the church that had to be segregated, but not separated from the intrinsic requirement of the Mass. I thought to myself, why don't we just go home? Nope, not till Mass is done. The quiet room was across the hall from the bathrooms, and I had occasion to go there, too. But the bathroom there wasn't such a mysterious place. Later in my life, it occurred to me that a church with a bathroom is like a hospital with a chapel. The very idea that we would ever need a bathroom when we're supposedly created in God's image is just as insane as saying that someone should be given a special expensive place to go thank an outside disinterested third party for the hard work that the doctors and nurses really did. Pure dishonesty. As we walked through the foyer doors into the main body of the church, we saw right away that it was a tall and majestic Catholic church in good condition. Still is today. It has a high, lofty ceiling with huge wooden framework all exposed. Long cords hold lights which point straight down onto the pews like hot lamps over stale French fries. There's one long aisle going right down the middle of the church in the classic fashion, and the side entrances have smaller versions of the same at 90-degree angles perpendicular to the main section. The altar area extends opposite the main aisle. It forms a cross shape that you can see inside, but what's remarkable is that about 30% of the pew space on the sides is invisible to about 60% of the pew occupants in the middle section of the church. When it's Christmas Mass or some other standing room-only service, there may be up to 50 people you can't see because of the corners between the center and the side section. I don't think I've seen more than a handful of churches that feature this design flaw. I consider it a flaw in design because one main purpose of the church is supposed to be to bring people together at the Mass. The designers of this church obviously didn't have that in mind. The cross-shape idea was too endearing to the Catholic designers, I suppose. The sound system is loud, and if you walk in during a service, you'll know it. The celebrant's voice booms out throughout the speakers, placed liberally throughout the upper portions of the church. Above you, as soon as you walk past the foyer doors and down the main aisle, is the choir loft. Now, when I was a student at Holy Ghost, I only got to go up there a couple of times. It was usually closed and off limits to us students. It looked fun, though, to have a bird's-eye view of what had been so boring for so long. I think they kept kids out of that loft because of the potential for gravity to inspire the students to launch missiles of various types, like spitballs. We loved spitballs. Just imagine the chaos. It was not to be. The whole church is done in a very simple material way, mostly solid wood and lots of marble with gold here and there. Really, there was lots of gold, or gold-colored metal. The chalices were probably solid gold, I don't know. But the general look you get when you walk in is one of extreme wealth. Somebody here is rich, you'll think to yourself, as I did. To your left and right are side aisles, and on the right of those aisles are confessional booths. There were 6 in all, I believe. Above them were the carved wooden depictions of the Stations of the Cross. Those are the 12 steps in the story of Jesus' execution that are so vital to every Catholic child. From his arrest in the Garden of Gethsemane to his burial in the tomb, the Stations of the Cross will lead you through the height of Catholic joy, a la the Passion of the Christ. Of course, the version we heard in church and church school was toned down quite a bit from the level of the Passion, but we had to learn it nevertheless. In fact, we had to learn and hear about it quite a lot. Each Mass discussed some aspect of it, and many religious classes focused on it. That's one story in the Bible that turned me off to Christianity early in my life. I could never pretend Jesus was a smart guy, not in the least. He didn't utter a word in his own defense, but he's treated like he was innocent of any crime or harm to anyone. You would think that Christians would want to downplay Jesus' most lame moment, but no, it's quite the opposite. They love to celebrate his execution, and they relive it over and over, and that's what we young Catholics had to do. I was very familiar with torture methods when I was in 2nd grade, also with how not to conduct yourself if you're ever arrested. Pontius Pilate got a bad rap from that. Catholics always try to vilify him for his part in Jesus' execution, even though they love the fact that he was executed. It's their tradition to point fingers, so Pilate and the Jews got vilified over the years. Now at my church, the Jews got off scot-free. There was no anti-Semitism that I can remember in my church. Only Pilate and Judas got the finger pointed at them in my church. This bothered me in religion class. Pilate tried to help Jesus. We can all easily read about that. Jesus offered no clear or logical explanation for his words and actions, as if he wanted to die. That's essentially a variation of what we now call suicide by cop. Anyway, the confessional booths on the left and right added to the subjective position that most young Catholics were raised in. But that's a sacrament that doesn't happen until around 6th grade, so I'll save my talk about the confessionals for that chapter. Straight ahead and down the main aisle is the altar area, or the stage, if you think of it as a show. It very much was and still is a show.